Good afternoon, everyone. So today we are going to start with our next topic of the biology class, that is the type of pollinations. So first we have discussed about the pollination, how the process occurs, that is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the flower, right? And anther is the male part of the flower, while the stigma is the female part of the flower, right? So now we will be continuing and we'll be discussing about the types that pollination can be of how many types that we'll be discussing about. So here we have two types of pollination in front of us. That is, first is self-pollination and the other is cross-pollinations. So if we talk about it, as the name suggests, self means our own, right? While cross means when we are talking about our own as well and the other as well. So first, if we talk about the self-pollination, then it is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower born on the same plant. The other flower will be of the same plant only and not on the other plant. Then only we'll be calling it as self-pollination. While if you talk about the cross-pollination, it is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower born on a different plant of the same species. We know that the species needs to be similar for pollination to occur. If the species are not similar, then the pollination will be occurring between similar species only. But if the pollen is going from the anther of the one flower to the stigma of the another flower of the same species, then we are calling it as cross pollination. If you talk about self pollination, it does not require any external agency. So if the pollination is occurring in the same flower of the same plant, right, then we won't be requiring any external agency. External agency as in like air, water, or any other agencies like that, insects, birds, animals. In case of self pollination, they are not necessary, or we can say they are not required. But if we talk about cross pollination, an external agent is required. The example of some external agencies are written in front of you, that is wind, water, insects, animals as well. Sometimes we humans as well also work as like external agency for some type of pollinations, and so it is always required in case of cross pollination. And both anther and stigma mature at the same time in case of self pollination. So students, if we talk about self pollination, just think about it. If a flower is there and the male part of the plant, that is anther, it has matured itself, but the female part of the plant, stigma, that it has not matured itself, then what would happen? Does the fertilization happen or not? Or we can say the pollination, will it take place or not if the maturation is of at different times? So we can say that self pollination will only occur if the anther and the stigma mature at the same time, because otherwise the self-pollination would not be possible. And anthers and stigma mature at different times in case of cross-pollination, because it is in cross-pollination it is required that anther of one flower should go towards the stigma of the another plant. So it is a benefit only for the cross-pollination if they are at the different time. So the next point is that it can occur even if the flower is closed. So self pollination can happen even if the flower is closed. If a flower is closed, the male part and the female part of the plant will be inside of it already. So and as we have also studied that it does not require any external agency. So if any external agency is not required, then alone if the flower is also closed, then also can like it can undergo self pollination, right? So it can occur when the flower is closed also. But if you talk about cross pollination, it occurs only when the flower is open. And you would now be knowing why. I think you must know by now that how why we are calling it as that. It can also occur when the flower is. It can only occur when the flower is open. Because if the flower is closed, how will a anther will go towards the stigma of the another flower, right? Because for that to happen, flower should be open. So we can say it occurs only when the flower is open in case of cross pollinations. Okay, I'll move it a bit. I'll move myself a bit so that you'll be able to watch it carefully. Yes. So produces homozygous offsprings. So self pollination, we can say homozygous. How? Homo means same. Zygous means zygote. The zygote that is developed will be similar to the parent. How? Because there will be no one from the outside, no gene from the outside will be coming, as the anther will be of the same species of the same plant, and the stigma will be of the same species of the same plant. Then how then the offspring that will be produced will be similar to that only, that they will be, and they will be calling it as homozygous offsprings. But if we talk about cross pollination, they produces heterozygous offspring. Why heterozygous? Because the plant is different. Species is same, but the plant is different. The anther is of different plant, while the stigma is of different plant. So the species, or the sorry, the offspring that will be produced will be heterozygous, that is different. Hetero means different. The offspring will be different in case of cross pollination. And the last point is that they does not introduce any variation. The self pollination, the flowers or the plant that undergo self pollination, they are not introducing any kind of variation. Why there are no variation in case of self pollination? Because nothing new is coming. The combination of parent, or we can say the combination of the anther and stigma, or the nucleus that is inside the ovule, we can say, right? They are of the same plant. Nothing new is getting inside, right? So, okay, there was a bit of a disturbance there. I'm sorry for that. Okay. So nothing new is coming in case of self pollination. So they are not introducing any kind of variation in the offspring they are producing. But if we talk about cross pollination, there is something new. The new that is there is the genes that are coming from the other plant. The anther from one plant is getting transferred to the stigma of the another plant, and not on the similar plant, the plant that is different from the first one. So when there is a difference in the parents, then certainly there will be a difference in the offspring as well. So we can say that in cross pollination they will be introducing variation, while in self pollination there will be no variation that will be introduced. So we will be moving forward with this thought, right? So now you will be thinking, and you will be answering yourself in the and answering in the chat box to this question, that what advantages, or sorry, the what adaptations are required from a flower if it has to undergo cross pollination. What do you think, that what are the different adaptations that a plant should have if it has to undergo cross pollination? Yes, I'll be giving you time of 1 minute so that you can think upon it and you can apply upon it. There are different advantages which a plant or anyone has to make if it has to get any kind of benefit in the nature, right? We also, when we get into any kind of new environment, we also have to make certain adaptations to get adjusted into that environment, and to get certain benefits from that environment. So if we talk about flowers also, they there are certain changes that they need to undergo if they want to sustain, or we can say if they want to undergo cross pollination. The first that will be that nectar, they should be producing nectar for that, because they will be producing nectar, because if the nectar is produced, then insects will come to feed on that nectar, and that insect that will be coming onto that flower, it will be taking pollens from that flower to the stigma of the other flower, that it will be sitting on for the nectar again, right? So there will be, in that way there will be cross pollination of anthers of one flower towards the stigma of the other flower. So the first part is this, and then there will be the second part. The second part is the
Yes, and after the and just like nectar, there is also like colors. The color of the petals also matters for cross pollination to happen. The adaptation that flowers require is the color of the flower as well. Because if the flower is attractive, more animals or more insects will be attracted towards the flower. That will help the flower to undergo the cross pollination. So the flower color, or we can say the nectar secretion, these are some of the adaptations that the flower has to undergo for cross pollination to occur in it, right? So there are some other adaptations also as well, which you will be searching, so that I would know that you are working upon it or not. Yes, so we will move forward from here. Yes, so the first question that you need to do now is, you will be choosing the correct statement and you will be giving the answer to these statements in the chat box. So the first statement is, a hibiscus plant which usually gives red flowers can be made to give pink flowers if it is cross fertilized with hibiscus plant producing white flowers, if this is possible or not. The second statement is, self-pollination is required for preservation of parental characters. That is, it is saying that with self-pollination, homozygous characters will be formed basically. So the option is first is only once first statement is correct. The B, that is first and second both the statements are correct. The third, that only the second statement is correct, and the third and the D option, that is none of the above statements are correct. So you will be giving the answer to these questions in the chat box, and I will be replying to you if you have given the right response or not, right? The second question is, the following characteristics belong to which type of pollination? The characteristics which we are discussing upon is that no wastage of pollen grain is there. Flowers are not required to be showy and large. Nectar and scent are not required to be produced by flowers. Now this is connected to the elaboration part that we were discussing just now. You will be thinking upon it and you will be answering that whether it is self pollination, they are the characteristics of the self pollination, or the cross pollination. So you will be giving your answers in the chat box. Yes, now this is the part we are going to start with now. So I will be moving, sorry for this, so I will be moving myself to here so that you can view it properly. So you will try to locate the ovule in the given diagram. Yes, as you know, we have already discussed about the structure of flower, that is how the flower will undergo reproduction with the help of flowers. Flower as a sexual structure basically. So you will be locating the ovule in this given diagram. Yes, you will try to do that. I will give you few seconds. Yes, so this part of the flower here, this part of the flower is being called as ovule. Here the seed that will be formed after the fertilization of the male and the female nuclei, the seed will be formed herein. So we will be moving forward from here. The other part that are missing is, this one is the anther and this one is the petal. Yes, now we have the structure of ovule in front of us. So we can see different part of the ovule, right? This part will be starting from here basically, the base part. So the placenta, as in humans also, placenta is the connection between the parent and the child, which is the ovule in this case, and the parent basically is the mother, that is the female gametophyte in this case, in case of plants basically. So it is connected to the placenta, the ovule is connected to the placenta with the help of funicle. So it is a stalk-like structure connecting the ovule and the placenta. And then we have inner integument and the outer integument. They both are looking like coverings. So they are coverings. So we can say they are coverings. So the one first is the inner covering, that is near towards the embryo sac, or we can see the inner part of the ovule, that we are calling it as inner integument, and that is away from the ovule, or we can say the inner part, that is embryo sac, we are calling it as outer integument basically. And then we have they are basically the coverings. And then we have synergies. Syn means together. They have there we have two cells together, that is we are calling them as synergies. They are collectively helping the egg cell for its nutrition, and we can say for its fertilization as well. They are helping the egg cell. So they will be surrounding the covering the egg cell from one side. They are being called as synergies. Then there is this egg cell, right? I hope you can see this clearly. This is the egg cell. Then in the center there is this secondary nuclei, like apart from the egg cell there is this secondary nucleus, we can say that. And then the cells, the three cells that are opposite towards the synergy cells, they are being called as antipodal cells. They are antipodal cells. There are three in number, and they are opposite in from the direction towards the synergids. And then lastly we have chalaza. It is the opposite end. The two ends of the ovule are being called as micropyle and the chalazal end. Micropylar end, this one, and the chalazal end. So chalaza is the basal part basically, while the micropyle is the upper part, or we can say the frontal part of the ovule, where there is a small pore-like opening as well, from where the pollen tube, which when is formed, it will be entering toward this pore towards the embryo sac. And this whole structure is being called as which is 8 celled and 7 nuclei. You will be counting along with me. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 nucleus, and cells we will be saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There we have secondary nucleus. There we have 2 nucleuses. 7 celled, 8 nucleated structure will be seen in this ovule. Yes, 7 celled and 8 nucleated structure. Then we have this structure. Now we will be discussing upon the structure, and like in detail the structure of ovule basically. Yes, so the ovule is a structure of a plant that develops into a seed after the fertilization process. As I have already told you that this, after the fertilization of male and the female gamete, they will be developing into a seed basically. This ovule will be developed into a seed after the fertilization process, because fertilization will be taking place herein. Yes, fertilization will be taking place herein. I will be moving myself herein. Yes, fertilization will be taking place in the embryo sac, while this structure will hold the embryo sac and seed will be developed inside it, right? So we can say that a mature ovule contains food tissue. One or two future seed coats will be there that will be covering it, and we call them integuments. We have discussed about 2 integuments that are there, so we are calling them as 2 seed coats, and these leave an opening at the top portion of the ovule, and we have discussed that it is being called as micropyle, and we are calling it as micropylar end as well. And the body of the ovule has 2 ends, that are the basal end and the other end, that is being called as micropylar end. The other end, the first end, that was chalazal end. I've already told you, this is the chalazal end, and this part is the micropylar end basically, right? So the body of the, yes, this is happened, and the integuments enclose a huge nutritious tissue that is being called as nucellus. So the nucellus herein, which we forgot to discuss, it is the nutritious tissue that is present in the ovule. It gives nutrition to the growing zygote when it is required, right? And the synergies of the cell in embryo sac that are there to guide the pollen tube to the ovule. So the synergies will be secreting some kind of chemicals, or we can say chemical attractants, which will be attracting, or which will be signaling the pollen tube to develop towards the micropylar end basically, so that it will be able to enter the ovule and give off the male nuclei, so that they can fuse with the female one and the fertilization can happen, right? So this is the whole process of fertilization, how it will be occurring in the ovule. Yes, now you will be thinking the how do you think the absence of nucellus will impact the embryo development? But how do you think the absence of embryo, if the nucellus, that is the nutritious part of the ovule, if it is absent, then how will it impact the embryo? You will be giving your answers in the chat box. So I will be giving you a few seconds for that. Yes, the light has come again. Yes, so I will be guiding you with that. So if the nucellus, this is a basic question basically. If the nucellus, the tissue that is nutritious toward the embryo, if that is not there, then the work it is doing, it will be impacted. It is giving nutrition to the cell, or the ovule we can say, or the embryo sac we can say, to be more precise. That nucellus, the nutrition that the nucellus is providing, that nutrition will be absent basically. So it will be directly impacting the growth of the embryo, and that embryo is going to develop into the new seedling, or we can say the new plant in the next generation. So that will be hampered if the nucellus is not there. So we can say the proper growth of the embryo sac, or the zygote in turn will not be there if the nucellus is not present in the ovule. And the next question is that funicle connects the ovule with dash in the ovary. So we have discussed this, that how, that what does, like, funicle is like making a connection between which two parts of the ovule. You will be answering this. You can punch your responses in the chat box. And the next question is to match the keywords with their correct explanation. So micropyle should be matching with which explanation, you will be telling it in the chat box. And ovule is there, then synergies is there. You will be attaching this with the respective explanations. I will be giving you few seconds to read these three explanations so that you will be able to match it in the chat box. I will be moving myself here so that you will be able to see it clearly. Yes, I hope you have read it by now. So you will be giving your answers. Yes, now we have germination of pollen tube on stigma. We know that the pollen will be coming towards the stigma of the flower for it to germinate. Because if the pollen is not germinated over the stigma, that the male nuclei that is inside the pollen grain will not reach the female nuclei basically. Right? So the first part is, we can see in the diagram as well. Yes, so the pollen grain is there, it has reached, you can see, you will be able to see two pollens basically, right? You can see two pollens here. This is the first pollen, this is the second pollen, and one, we can see that this pollen tube is not that much developed, but this one, this pollen tube is perfectly developed and it is reaching toward the embryo sac, and in turn the female, or we can female germ cell, right? So what would be the scenario, why do you think that this pollen is not able to develop here? So I will be telling you the answer, that this pollen is not able to develop over this, or we can say the germinate to over this stigma, is that because the reason is that because it is not belonging to the similar species, or it is not having the compatibility that is required to germinate over this stigma. Because so this is how they are like avoiding, or we can say they are inhibiting the other species, the pollen from the other species to enter the stigma, because we need some kind of filter in the nature as well to avoid the wrong crossovers, right? If they are not from the similar species, you must have been thinking about this, that any pollen can land on the stigma. If it is cross pollination, then any type of pollen will land from pollen from the other part of the plant, or pollen from the other species can also land over the stigma of the flower. But how will the flower detect it? So it is the work of the stigma, some chemicals are present in the stigma that will be working as like the gatekeepers, who will be checking whether the pollen that has fallen over it is from the same species or not. If it is not, then they will be incompatible, they will be showing the incompatibility like this, where the pollen tube is not able to develop properly. And if it is from the similar species, then it will be showing the compatibility, and the pollen tube will be germinated and it will be growing towards the ovule to enter the ovule, and release of the pollen grains, the release of the male gametes will be there in the embryo sac, and they will be fusing with the female nuclei to form the to undergo fertilization basically, and to fuse and to make the zygote in the embryo sac. So this is the whole what the whole structure was depicting. So once we'll be discussing about what is written here as well. So once a pollen grain falls in the stigma of a flower, on the stigma of a flower of its similar species, it sends out a pollen tube below through the style. So below the style, pollen tube will be extending if it is detecting that it is from the similar species. This tube enters inside the ovary and then reaches into the ovule of the plant. Then this tube will be entering towards the ovary and they will be reaching towards the ovule of the plant. Once that occurs, the fertilization process can arise as the nucleus of the pollen grain is brought down from the tube for fertilizing with the nucleus in the embryo sac. Yes. So we can say the fertilization can only occur if the pollen pollen is able to germinate the pollen tube inside of the stigma, and it will be extending towards the style and moving forward towards the ovule, basically inside the, that is present inside the ovary of the plant. I hope it is clear to you what I have discussed with you till now. Yes, so we will be moving forward now. Have again have a thinking point here. So you will be thinking that whether it is possible for every pollen that fall on a stigma to successfully germinate into a pollen tube, and if yes, you will be giving your reason for that also, and if no, then also you will be giving your response in the chat box. I will be looking after it, and I will be giving you the correct answer if you are not able to, or the hint towards the correct answer. I'll give you some few seconds to think upon this statement, that whether it is possible for every pollen that is falling over the stigma to successfully germinate into a pollen tube. We have already discussed about this previously. I've just told you how this happens and why this happens. So I hope you have come to a conclusion by now. So we'll be moving forward from here now. Yes, so now we have two questions in front of us. The first question is that pollen tube formation occurs only if the, just let me just adjust this. Pollen tube formation occurs only if the pollen falls on the stigma of the same species. You will be telling whether this statement is true or it is a false. Is it a false statement? According to you, you will be punching your responses in the chat box, and I'll be giving you the correct answer if you're true about it or not. Yes, and the second question is integuments leave an opening at the top portion of the ovule, we are calling it as, whether it is being called as micropyle, nucellus, funicle, and synergies. So if you were hearing what I was discussing earlier, and if you're clear about the situation, or we can say the diagram, that the diagram of the ovule, you will be able to answer this question perfectly. So the opening of at the top portion of the ovule, it is being called as, and you'll be punching a response in the chat box. So we'll be moving forward from here. Yes, now we'll be doing a quick recap. So we have studied about the two different types of pollens, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. The self-pollination is about when the the pollen from the anther is falling over the stigma of the same flower, or the another flower of the same plant, basically. While the cross-pollination is when the pollen is falling from the one flower to the stigma of the another flower of the different plant. Yes, sorry about that. And the next is, we have discussed about the structure of ovule in the flower of a plant. We have discussed how there are different parts of the ovule which are helping in the process of fertilization in different ways. And the third is the process of pollen germination or stigma, and how the process of incompatibility is also there. The phenomenon of incompatibility, or we can say the self compatibility, is also there, which can be seen pretty easily in the diagram. So you have thought about it as well, and you must have given responses in the chat box as well. So we have discussed about the pollen germination as well. And the questions that you need to answer now is that wind pollinated flowers differs from insect pollinated flowers in having dash, either they are large and sticky, having large and sticky pollens, or small and light pollens, small petals and sticky pollens, and colored petals with large pollens. You will be telling what kind of flower should a flower be having if it has to be pollinated from the to the external agency, that is wind. And the second question is, you will be explaining the process of pollen germination on stigma of the flower. So I hope you will be able to do this now, as we have discussed this. And the third question is, the type of pollination required for producing variety in plant species is termed as. We have discussed that what kind of variation will be there, if there will be any variation of there, or there will be no variation in terms of different type of pollination that are there, whether it will be self pollination or cross pollination. You will be answering that as well. So I hope the instructions were clear and you understood what I tried to discuss here. So thank you, class. We'll be meeting again.